It's in your pocket.
Hello. Oh, hello. It's lovely that you all speak back to me. My name's Carrie, I'm from Showtown. And today we've got a talk on Lawrence Wright, aptly named The Right Way to Do It. We're just finishing off some of the coffees that we're having and then we'll get started. But like I say, we're really excited that you've joined us today, and it's my privilege to introduce Pete Lindup to you today. He is an entertainer and performer, and we are so excited to learn more about Lawrence Wright and the impact and impression that he made on this town over the years. So without further ado, if you can all give a round of applause for Pete Lindup to get him started. Thank you.
Oh, don't stop. No. Keep it going, go, that allows you finish. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, lovely to see you all here. Thanks for taking the trek all the way down here to come in here and see this talk about somebody I think has been sadly neglected over the last years since he was active. Someone I think deserves more memory than is been achieved, because in my view he's one of the pioneer creators of entertainment in our incredible town. And I'm trying to redress the balance today and make everybody aware that there was such a person. Because, well, when he came on his holidays to Blackpool in the 1950s, as I did, as a lad, well, first of all, it was the most amazing place to come to on holiday, especially for me, from the West Riding, rather grimy West Riding. One of the attractions to me were the great big hoardings outside the theatres. They seemed to be an attraction in themselves. And of course, they would always have the producer's name above the title, which is common practice everywhere. If you stood outside the Hippodrome, you would probably have seen the name Tom Arnold Presents Light Up the Town, which was the name of the show. If you turned around and looked at the front of the Opera House, you would have seen the names George and Alfred Black Present The Big Show, which in the year I'm thinking of starred Julian Warris, Alma Cogan, Eve Boswell, and in the front of the Grand Theatre, further down Church Street, you probably would have seen the name Jack Hilton Presents Arthur Askey in such and such a play. I can't just remember whose name was outside the Palace. Well, I can scarcely remember the Palace now, of course, 60 years ago. Probably Bernard Delfont, was it? Maybe. Certainly outside the Queen's Theatre, which was the first thing you saw when you arrived on a Saturday morning. You came out of the Central Station. The first thing you saw was the Queen's Theatre. I don't know if anybody remembers it. It was almost opposite the entrance to the Central Station. A fellow called James Brennan put shows on there. It was originally called Feldman's, of course. Jimmy Brennan rescued it. I'm sure his name must have been outside. It must have been outside the theatre. Certainly, if you looked at the front of the Central Pier, you would definitely have seen the name Peter Webster. Yeah. Absolutely, without any doubt whatsoever. You couldn't walk 5 yards down that pier, could you, without seeing his name? Uncle Peter, 11 o'clock and 3. Peter Webster's Let's Have Fun, name of the show in the theatre, 6 o'clock and 8:30. But the only one of those names which meant anything to me was the name outside this very pier. And that name, as everybody knows, of course, belonged to this gentleman here. Could we have the first slide, please, Karen? Rather young Lawrence Wright, and he presented shows in this very theatre. And he lived in Blackpool. He wasn't from Blackpool, he actually was born in Leicester in 1888. And by all accounts, a very talented youngster. Yes, he played at least 5 instruments. He played the violin, he played piano, he played organ, he played mandolin, he played banjo. Don't you hate these multi-talented people? Yeah. You don't need nerves, don't they? And he also helped out in his his family owned a music shop in Upper Conduit Street in Leicester. Now, young Lawrence thought he could do better on his own. So in 1906, he hired a stall in Leicester Market just for the sale of sheet music. So he would have been, what, 18 years of age, that's all. And he thought he could do better writing his own songs rather than the ones he was selling. So the following year, he sprung out as a composer of songs. Now, one of the songs he was trying to sell, had the rather unlikely title of Don't Go Down the Mine, Daddy. It wasn't selling all that well, surprisingly enough, but fate stepped in. there was a dreadful mining disaster in Whitehaven. So the enterprising young Lawrence had superimposed on the tops of this copy of music 50% of the profits of this song will go towards the mining disaster in Whitehaven, and it sold in its hundreds. So, encouraged by that, he went down to London in 1911 and he hired a basement in a little street called Denmark Street in London. There he could compose his songs, he could publish them, publish other people's, and sell them in the streets. It was in the First World War. Yes, he was in the Navy. There is a photograph of him in his naval uniform, which we're not allowed to show, are we? It's one of the copyright ones, yeah. I thought it might be. And he was in the Navy. As far as we can find out, he never got nearer to the front than Crystal Palace. Nevertheless, he was in the Navy, and his family looked after his businesses. And when he returned, he opened fresh premises on this same Denmark Street, and that is really where the Lawrence Wright Music Publishing Company really got going. And of course, all the other publishers had gathered around this same, it's only a short, narrow street in the West End of London. All the other publishers, they all congregated around that same area. Even I can remember on the corner of Charing Cross Road, a company called Francis Day and Hunter. Yeah. Probably have heard that name. Burt Feldman would have been further down Charing Cross Road. Opposite Lawrence's would have been Campbell Connelly. There was Peter Morris Music. There was Keith Prowse. And of course, with all these pianos jangling away all day long, pounding out the latest songs, he got a nickname in Denmark Street. Some bright sparks said, "God blimey, sounds like Tin Pan Alley down here." And the name stuck. So Lawrence really was the daddy of Tin Pan Alley. Now, his first foray into Blackpool seemed to have been in 1919 when he ran a concert party in what was known as Happy Valley. Have we got that? Have we got that picture there? My kids are cool. Yeah, that was the front. That was the front of his store in Denmark Street. And the next one, yeah, I think you can just about make out on the right, Happy Valley, Lawrence Wright Piero show. Can you just about see that? Yeah. Anybody pinpoint where it is? Well, that street there, of course, is Warbrick Hill. So Happy Valley was actually in Gin Gardens in those days. I reckon that's about where the Gin is these days, you know, the Gin pub. Because the original Gin was round about where the roundabout is. And he moved to Blackpool permanently in 1922. And he took up residence in the castle on the North Promenade. Not the Norbury Castle. Need more taste than that. No, come on. The one that's been a casino. Now, we can show you this photograph because I took it myself. And that was, you recognise it, of course, as the gambling casino. Well, that was his home. And he immediately set about creating a lot of these song booths. He had a load of them right along the promenade, and shops and stores just selling sheet music. In fact, in his heyday, he had no less than 20 of these outlets for his music. Absolutely incredible, really. This is the one, is this the next slide, Carrie? Yeah, that's the one on Central Drive there. I think you can make it out. Lawrence Wright's successors. He got all his songs there that he was plugging at the time. Brilliant promoter of songs, brilliant promoter. Oh yeah, in fact in 1928 he was plugging a song called Me and Jane in a Plane. Now it's a pretty unremarkable song, but to plug it, he hired the Royal Pilot and had him pilot a plane right up the promenade, above the promenade obviously, round the tower, and on board with Jack Hilton's band, tooting out this tune, you know, Me and Jane in a Plane. Me and Jane in a Plane. Well, someone on board the plane threw out copies of the sheet music to the rather surprised visitors underneath. There we are. There it is. Now, this is a project I would think wouldn't get the go-ahead these days. What do you think? If somebody came to the council with that idea, I've got this great idea for promoting a song, taking a band aloft and throwing out cheat. No, I don't think that would get very far. But what a promotion. What a promoter. He also wrote a song called Baghdad. And to promote Baghdad, he hired an elephant from London Zoo. Whether he tunnelled it round to Denmark Street, we're not so sure, but he certainly used it in publicity shots. There is a lovely photograph of that. We're not allowed to show it, are we? Is that the one we're not allowed to show? We've got some issues with copyright over these, I'm afraid. Anyway, yes, and another occasion, he actually hired a couple of girls and dressed them up like harem girls. Is it harem? You know what I mean? Harem, yeah, depending on where you're from. Yeah, harem. You know what I mean? And so they could ride a couple of camels around Piccadilly Circus. I'm not making this up, it's true, you know. So he could publicise a song called Sahara, somewhere in Sahara, far across the eastern sea. Someone to me there is singing love songs of Araby. As I say, he wrote all these songs, but he hardly ever used his own name. He always had an alias, and the one he used most often was Horatio Nichols. If ever you see an old copy of music and it says composed by Horatio Nichols, well, that was Lawrence. In 1927, he boarded a ship bound for New York in order to try and break into the very lucrative American market. And on the way over, he was reading a novel called The Shepherd of the Hills. Thinks to himself, now that would make a good title for a song, I'll write one. And he did. He got his old friend Edgar Leslie to provide the lyric, and by the time the boat, the SS Majestic, docked in New York, he'd finished the song. So, from a New York office, he telephoned his old friend Jack Hilton in London, told him about this song he'd written on the ship, and asked Jack Hilton to write it down, you see. Jack Hilton, of course, in those days, was a very big band leader. In fact, he had one of the very best bands in all of the dance band era. This is before, I suppose, he became a manager and an agent. So he wrote it down, he handed it to his arranger, he wrote out parts for the band to play, and so the story goes, they played it that very same evening in a broadcast from the Alhambra Hotel in London. At the same time, he persuaded an American band leader to do the same thing. Some sources tell us it was Paul Whiteman's orchestra, or one of them, he had quite a few. However, that has gone down on record as the first time, and I should think the only time, a song has had its first broadcast on the same day, because of the time difference, on opposite sides of the Atlantic. And if that isn't brilliant promotion, I don't know what is. So, how well did he do with these songs? You know, it was still a dicey business. Well, there is a letter in the archive, if I can find it, from, as you see, it's all very well arranged, it is. That's in Gin Gardens, we've passed it and all that. There is a letter from...
It's not on the floor, is it, Pete?
Not yet, it will be soon. Now, we're not allowed to show you the original, are we? That's the original, but I'll read it to you. It's very interesting reading, is this. They'll clear it up later. It's from a company called De Silva, Brown and Henderson. That is not a team of solicitors. They're not commissioners for us. They were song publishers. Actually, they were songwriters, composers. Oh, thanks, Gary. Buddy De Silva, Lou Brown and Ray Henderson wrote some of the most memorable songs of the 1920s. All forgotten now, of course. They wrote songs like Keep Your Sunny Side Up, Button Up Your Overcoat. The best things in life are free. If I had a talking picture of you. It's not a quiz, this, but you do. They wrote a song for Al Jolson called Sunny Boy, Varsity Drag, Birth of the Blues, and they also published other people's songs. And this is a letter from them to Lawrence. Very interesting reading. It more or less says, our business manager advises us that we are forwarding to you a payment, which is your share of the royalties for your song we've published in America, Among My Souvenirs. Now that was the most successful song that Lawrence, aka Horatio Nichols, ever wrote. And the sum involved, well, it's just under $16,000. Now this is in 1928. I don't know how many dollars there would be to a pound. Maybe 3 or 4, something like that. So it still represents about £4,000 or £5,000, which is a fortune in 1920. 95 years ago must have been a fortune. Not bad now, is it? I could write a song. I wish I could write a song, get £4,000. So it was doing rather well, you might think. Anyway, in 1924, Lawrence took over the running of the entertainment side of this very pier, and he presented shows in the theatre for a record 32 years. That was a world record. No one had presented shows for that length of time in those days consecutively in the same venue. And of course he called his productions On With The Show. I'm sorry to disappoint Dennis. He thought of that title, didn't you, Dennis? Somebody beat you to it. But you're keeping the name going. And what he seemed to have done, he took the basic element of the End of the Pier show, which of course was the concert party. I mean, well, they would have started decades and decades earlier, of course, on the beach, in fit-ups. Then when the piers appeared, they moved their productions to the End of the Pier in open-air concert parties. And what Lawrence seemed to have done, he took that basic element and he presented it in the theatre, gave it great production value, specially designed costumes, specially designed sets and scenery, and of course specially written music, because music was a very important factor of his songs, because if you heard a song in one of his shows which you liked, well, you could always obtain the sheet music, of course, one of his 20 outlets on the beach. He's also very shrewd in realising that if you were going to attract people down the pier, you better have someone topping the bill that the audience could identify with, which meant definitely a northern, preferably a good Lancashire comic. That would be the great attraction, and that is exactly what he did. So do we have as a shepherd of the hills, do we have the, you keep moving about. Yeah, that's the, you recognise that, of course, On With The Show. You could use that in your publicity, Dennis. You could use that, yeah. And that was from 1930, yeah. And this is the bill from, have we got it? Is it the next one? Yeah, as you see, look at that, cast of thousands. Isn't it amazing? Absolute cast of thousands. And he said you better have somebody that the audience could identify with, a northern, preferably a good, strong Lancashire comic. And there you'll see, probably advertised, this is not a copyright poster, by the way. No, this is from a newspaper I've had for years. And you probably see the name Fred Walmsley. Yeah. Totally forgotten now, but he was a very, very popular Lancashire comedian in those days. As, of course, was this fellow here, Roy Barber. Yeah. How many of us were there when his granddaughter gave the talk? Remember that? It's about, must be 4 years ago. The Imperial Hotel, yeah. His granddaughter, Sue Barber, gave one better talk than this one. So he's got it right. He got everything right. And all this is going on. He's got the music publishing business going on very well. He's got the songwriting business going very well. And now he's got a prime venue in Blackpool with On With The Show. And whilst all this is going on, just for the heck of it, in 1926, he originated a newspaper, a periodical for the music profession. He got his old friend Edgar Leslie to act as the editor, and he launched it as the Melody Maker. There he is, walking down. There it is, the Melody Maker. And it's been defunct now, I know of, for about 2 decades at least. But for 72 years, that was the paper for the music profession, and he originated that in 1926. Now then, this is where technology takes over. In 1936, he wrote a song called Queen of the Sea. Now, this was to coincide with the launching of that great ocean-going liner, Queen Mary. The Queen Mary was launched in 1936, and Lawrence wrote a song, well, to cash in on it, really. Not only did he make the song, he also made a demo disc. That's a little disc he would make of your latest song, and you hawk it around managers, producers, agents, band leaders, singers, as a copy of your favourite song. Now, I managed to get a hold of a copy of this, we hope, song. We'll play a little bit of it now, hopefully. We must stress, this was not made by a professional recording company. In fact, I didn't realise demo discs went back as far as that. I know a common practice in the 50s and 60s and 40s. But anyway, I think it's worth listening to, because this is the only example we've been able to find of Lawrence actually performing one of his own songs, playing and singing one of his songs. It's called The Queen of the Sea. And I hope you can make out the words. Is that all we get?
1 moment.
1 moment.
Lost the contact.
Oh dear.
So close.
Shall I start again?
Hold on, very close. Give me one more go. Keep your fingers crossed.
Okay. I'm crossing my eyes and legs as well. Ah. Obviously, it's intended not to happen, isn't it, really?
It'll happen.
It'll happen, yeah. Funny sort of St. George's Day, isn't it? Lawrence, should we have a... No, nothing happened. Right, anyway.
It worked in rehearsal.
It worked in rehearsal. It worked in 1936. Well, I think what is the lyric was, I'm happy and gay, I'm happy and gay, I'm sailing away, I've booked my trip to the USA on the finest ship in the world, the Queen Mary, Queen of the Sea.
Who needs you two?
I don't need that, do you? Don't need that. Yeah, I think we've heard enough actually. Can you make head or tail of that? I can't. Now, whether he made $16,000 on that song, I'm not sure. I rather doubt it myself. But that would have been Lawrence performing his own song in 1936. Now, in 1937, he was in Trinidad. I don't know what he was doing there. Maybe trying to break into the Latin American market. I don't know. And while he was there, he heard this itinerant group of buskers playing this very attractive song. So he made inquiries, asking them what this song is called. He was told they don't know what it's called, they just perform it. Oh, well then ask them who composed this song they're just performing. He was told they don't know who composed it, they just perform it. Oh, he still thought it was an attractive song, a very catchy tune, so he wrote it down as it was being performed. Now this is where his musical ability came into use, because he could write things down by ear. Thinking to himself, now then, when I return home, I can copyright this song. Unfortunately, when he returned back here, he found out the song was already copyrighted by a Cuban composer called Lecuona, Ernesto Lecuona. He wrote a lot of Latin American music. I suppose the most famous is a piece called Malagueña, if you're familiar with that. Not to worry, I can always copyright the English version of this song, which he did. He had an English lyric added, and it was a runaway success as a song called CCC. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. CC. In Spain they say CC. In France they say oui, oui. Every little dance, young no charge for the choreographer. That was in 1937. In 1938, disaster. 1938, tragedy. On with the show had just got nicely going in the theatre when it was engulfed in a devastating fire. Totally destroyed the building. What a calamity. Absolutely awful. Anyway, unmoved by it, Lawrence decided that On With The Show would not be, there it is. You better avert your gaze, Dennis, it's a horrible sight. Especially to us who love theatres on piers. Yeah. He wasn't a stranger to fire. A similar fire had broken out about 17 years earlier. But he did vow that On With The Show would not be abandoned. He salvaged whatever he could, and he moved the whole production to the Arcade Theatre, which was on the front of the pier, the front end of the pier. And On With The Show carried on there. Yeah, then I've got a bill there somewhere for it. There they are. There they are. That's the melody maker I mentioned before. They're all out of sequence, you see. You get excited and yeah, he moved the whole show down to the front end of the pier. You just get a lectern with a bigger lip. Yes. It does say, this is a reproduction of the poster, it does say the Arcade Theatre on there. That was the show which was presented there in 1938. And he also vowed that On With The Show would return to its old home the following year. And as usual, Mr. Wright was right. And a new theatre was built in record time. You probably recognise it because this is a part of the same building we're sitting in now. I know it's had a lot of modifications over the years, but this is basically the same building he had built in 1939, and this is This is the bill. This is the bill for the first show, first summer season in this theatre. As you see, North Pier. Now, why he didn't call it the new pavilion, I don't know. He missed a good chance there, I think. And I don't know if you noticed the times, actually, of the show, 2:45 and 7:45. They had matinee performances and evening shows in these days. And like I said, he liked a good, strong comic for the top of the bill, a good, popular comedian from Lancashire. And in those days, very few people were more popular or infamous or notorious than this fella here. Frank Randall, born Arthur McAvoy in Wigan in 1901. Now, the story is he actually hitchhiked to Blackpool to seek his fame and fortune, had various occupations, and at one time he was in a comedy tumbling act in the Tower Circus. But then he got into concert parties, and he was helped along the way very much by another influential producer called Jack Taylor. And Jack Taylor put him into a revue in the Opera House in 1936 called King Fun. That was the name of the show, King Fun. What he called it, we don't know, but it was called King Fun. Ironically, as one of the support acts for another Wigan-born entertainer who also found great fame and fortune in Blackpool and everywhere else in the world. So, hee-hee. Turned out nice again, didn't it, for both of them? I always love this bill. There's some wonderful names. Look at that name, that's wonderful, isn't it? Sutherland Felch. How would you pronounce that? Felch. Sutherland Felch. Yeah, he was from Radio Olympia. And that's a great name too. Lance Fairfax. What a great name, Lance Fairfax. I happen to know he was a baritone singer. He was once billed as used to be billed as the broadcasting baritone. There's a double act here, Wheeler and Wilson. They were a Cockney double act, actually father and son. And when the father retired, when Wilson retired, his son carried on as a solo comedian called Jimmy Wheeler. Anybody remember Jimmy Wheeler? Yeah. Sure you do. Yeah, of course you do, yeah. Well, he played the violin, didn't he, as well, like Lawrence? Yeah. Interspersed with a lot of these one-liners. What did he play? Once upon a time, there was a Chinaman. Now look how many there are. A fella passed me in the street. He said, "Excuse me, Gov, could he help me out? I haven't had a bite all day." So I bit him. Going into a fish and chip shop on the way here. I said to the fella behind the counter, "You got any chips left?" He said, "Yes, hundreds." I said, "Well, serve you right for cooking so many." And as the auctioneer said to the highest bidder, "Aye, aye." That's a long. Jimmy Wheeler went on for years. Six Health and Beauty Girls. Wonder what they did. What else have we? Oh yes, down here, tucked away, 17 Terry's Juvenile. Where did they put them in the dressing room space here, I wonder? 17 Terry's Juvenile. Well, they were a bunch, of course, of young girl dancers. And one of the juveniles in that very season, in that very show, one of those little girls was called Little. Margaret Little. Oh, nice. And when Maggie Little grew up, admittedly not a lot, but when she did, she married a Blackpool-based entertainer called Tony Melody. Anybody remember Tony Melody? Yeah. Ah, of course you do. If you don't know the name, you've definitely seen him, because he stooged for every comic there was. Harry Worth, he was in Steptoe and Son, and he stooged for Jimmy Clitheroe for a long time, as well as doing his solo act. But in those days, she was, of course, Little Maggie Little. And when I showed her that poster about a few years ago, well, first of all, she was amazed that it had survived, because she hadn't seen that. She hadn't seen that poster since those days. And she remembered everybody on that bill. Everybody told me exactly what it was they did, what they wore, what the costumes were. Bram Martin, the band leader, how very helpful he was. And she also explained to me how very disciplined they were. The girls were lodged down Corn Street, and apparently every morning they'd be chaperoned down the street, down Talbot Road, across onto the pier. Weren't allowed to leave the pier, no. Weren't allowed to speak to anyone unless spoken to. Disciplines of the theatre. But of course, this is 1939, and we all know what happened on the 3rd of September, 1939. I have to tell you now that no such message was received, and consequently this country is at war with Germany. Well, that chilling announcement, of course, came on the 3rd of September, on the Sunday. Now, the following day, Maggie told me, everybody, which was Monday the 4th of September, everyone was called into Lawrence's office, all the cast, all the crew, everyone on the pier, to be told the show would have to come off. We were at war, no one knew what the heck was going to happen. So that season never actually finished. It just went on, she told me, until the following Saturday, the 9th of September. Disaster number 2 in less than a year. But of course, nothing much did happen, and all the theatres, all the cinemas, all the dance halls which had closed down, they all opened up again. And so he returned for the 1940 season, which that's 1941 then. Again with Frank Randall topping. He used Frank Randall for 3 years. I doubt if he could put up with it for more than 3 years, I don't know. No, he was not the easiest person to get along with. In fact, the rumour has it was his discarded cigarette which caused the fire, which burned the theatre down in the first place. And he found a new comic in the early 1940s, Dave Morris from... anybody remember Dave Morris? He was from Middlesbrough originally. And like Lawrence, he was in the First World War, but he was in the army. And he caught a nasty dose of that poisonous gas. The Germans were using this hideous mustard gas. Poor Dave Morris got a nasty dose of that. It affected his eyesight very badly. And he had to wear these very thick spectacles. But it didn't stop him treading the boards, no. He had the record for the most number of appearances in Blackpool consecutively in those days. I think it was something like 14 consecutive appearances, Dave Morris. I wish I could play you a bit of him, but there doesn't seem to be any recordings of him. What a shame. He was very popular. He was always having to go at the council, I seem to remember. Any councillors in, by the way? 1 or 2, yeah. Well, he was, wasn't he? He was having to go at the council. He'd have a field day these days, wouldn't he? No, I can hear him now saying, "What's that they've been doing, eh? What's that they've been doing in Talbot Road all these years? What have they been doing? Looks like Legoland. What are they doing?" And his last season was actually on the South Pier in 1959. There again, I remember the great big hoarding outside, which was a view of his back view, just his back view, with the trademark straw hat, striped blazer, ever-present cigar, thick spectacles, and all it said on this hoarding were 2 words: Dave's back. No, that's all it said. Dave's back. Everybody knew exactly who he was and where he was. Dave Morris died in 1960, I believe. So we're moving on now to this poster, which has been... I've lost it. Where's the other one? It was here somewhere. Oh, it's there. Of course it is. Yeah. Right, this is from 1942. This poster here. And I'm indebted to Beryl for bringing this along. Well, she very kindly loaned us the borrow of this poster. And as you see, it's Dave Morris again, and a cast of thousands. We added up all the names on this. It came to 50 people in this show. Amazing, isn't it? You don't get 50 in the whole of Blackpool nowadays. But this was 1942. And in 1942, there occurred disaster, tragedy number 3. In 1942, Lawrence suffered a debilitating stroke. He suffered a stroke in 1942, left him totally paralysed down, ironically, the right side. Lost the power of speech, had to move out of his lovely home, the castle. Absolute tragedy. He had to sell everything. He had a Compton organ installed in the home, and that had to go. He tried to sell it to Leonard Thompson. I know that because there is a letter from Leonard Thompson saying, "Thank you for the offer of the organ. I need to know how much you paid for it. I need to know how often you have it serviced. I need to know how much the servicing cost." He said, "But I already have 2 Compton organs at the Pleasure Beach, so I don't really need another. But if you'd happen to have any wines or spirits for disposal, I'd be happy to take those off your hands. Never mind the music, have you got any booze?" You know, because it would be rationed. And he moved into a bungalow in the next street, which of course is Carling Gate. That's where he spent the rest of his life. Now, I suspect if that had happened to anyone else, they would have said, "Well, blow this, I can't face it anymore," and he would have packed it in. But everybody's not Lawrence, of course. And he still continued. He still produced on with the show every year. He still commuted down to London, and he still went around the other resorts seeking out fresh talent. He seemed to have been very well looked after during all this time by, well, various ladies. One in particular called Lillian Jackson, or Miss Nurse Jackson, as he called her. She seemed to sort of look after him and take him wherever he wanted to go. So on with the show continued. On and on and on, and he still, as I say, still went around looking for fresh talent. And one of his travels actually took him to Scarborough to see a comic he'd heard about, who was appearing at the Alhambra, not the Alhambra, the Arcadia, wasn't it? The Arcadia in Scarborough, and the Arcadia, by the way, was later incorporated into the Futurist, of course, which is another theatre we've lost in recent years at the seaside. And he was very impressed with this comic, so he offered him a summer season here, or two. Unfortunately, while falling leaves, it's not part of the act. It is, it's the part we didn't rehearse. Thank you very much. And he was told that the comic actually had a 6-year contract with a Scarborough-based theatrical organisation called Catlin's. I think Catlin's had interests all over the country, didn't they? But anyway, they were based in Scarborough, and this comic had a 6-year contract with Will Catlin. Not to worry, said Lawrence. Let me know when your contract is up, and I'll present you on the North Pier. And true to his word, he did just that, because this is the bill, or a copy of the bill, for 1953. And still afternoon shows and evening shows. He was one of the very last, actually, to succumb to this twice nightly format, was Lawrence Wright. He thought that was shortchanging the public, you see. Your show had to last no more than 2 hours if you were doing 2 shows a night. He thought that was shortchanging them. So he was very reluctant to change his mind. And there, I think just to make out the name, Jack Story, he was topping the bill. Although when you look at this bill, it seems to me the Beverly sisters were topping the bill. But if Jack Story were here today, he'd say, oh no, I were top. Because if you have 3 names on the top of a bill, you see, by default it's the name on the left who is the star. Because you read from left to right. Well, you do, don't you? Well, you do, don't you? 3 Monarchs, a great mouth organ act. Some very familiar names. Philip Kelly. Who remembers Phil Kelly?
Yeah.
We all do, of course we do. Great big amiable Irish lad. Well, he was telling me once he came over from Ireland in 1950 to be part of Randall's Scandals. And he had a lot of stories about Frank Randall, none of which I could possibly repeat today. But he had only 2 more years. Well, he starred Jack Story again the following year, this time with Anne Shelton, very popular vocalist. That's 14. I'll leave all these out later, you can have a look at those. That was a great big production number from 1953. It had only 2 more years to do 1955 and 56. And this is a copy of the programme, front of the programme for 1956. Top of the bill were the 5 Smith brothers. Who remembers the Smith brothers?
Yeah.
I know Leslie does.
Dismiss 5 little boys.
Everybody? Hello, 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 hello. This is Mrs. Smith's 5 little boys, and we're saying to you, I'm in favour of friendship all over the world. What memories we have, eh?
Absolutely.
Either that or we're sad, one of the two. And the star comedian that year was Jimmy Page. Just a name. Anybody remember Jimmy Page?
I do,
A few of you do. Yeah. I'm afraid it's just a name to me. I've seen his name everywhere.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but oh dear.
I can tell you the right story about it.
Oh dear.
Not here.
Not here.
Not here, no.
Anyway, 1956. That was the last year for Lawrence on this pier. And top of the bill was Frankie Vaughan, just making his name, of course, in the entertainment business. Frankie Vaughan, give me the moonlight, give me the girl, I'll leave the rest. To me. I won't do the kick. No. Oh no. I've ruined 3 pairs of trousers doing that. No. And the star comic that year was Ted Loon. Who remembers Ted Loon? Very lugubrious comic, wasn't he, Ted Loon? Thin as a rail, wasn't he? Thin as a rail. poor fellow, he suffered from bronchitis quite a lot, and ultimately, I think they called it consumption, didn't they, in those days? He was never a well man, but very funny. And he used to read a letter. He used to read a letter in the middle of his act, remember? Yeah. I've had another one of them letters from me mum. I'll read it to you. Dear son, you will remember me, I am your mother. Hope you are having a nice time in Blackpool. You have now been away 3 weeks. It's a pity you didn't tell us you were going. We thought you were still in the bathroom. You remember your Aunt Edith? She's just had all her teeth out and the gas oven put in. Your Uncle Stanley lit the gas this morning. It caused such an explosion, it sent your uncle and aunt clean through the roof. It's the first time they've been out together for 17 years. We hear it can be very cold in Blackpool, so we are sending you your winter overcoat. And to cut the cost of postage, we have cut the buttons off. Isn't that clever? Cut the buttons off to save postage. You will find the buttons in the right-hand pocket. Must close now, as a man from the council is coming round to investigate a nasty smell. From your loving mother. That's a fib, is all that, actually. No, that wasn't Ted Loons, that was Jack Story. He used to do an act as a postman. But that was it. After 32 years, he called it a day and he retired. He pulled out of here, and of course the Delfont organisation, Bernard Delfont, presented shows here for, how many years? About as long, I should think. But it's not the end of his musical career, Lawrence Wright, far from it, because the following year he embarked on an extensive reissue programme of all his old songs. He republished all his old songs in album form. I have two of them here, a series called Songs the World Sings, which is no idle title, of course. There's a nice photograph of Lawrence at the front. He appears to be writing manuscript, having to use his left hand, of course, because of his disability. And I love the publicity for these albums. 75 songs there. Songs for TV, radio, film, stage, producers. By that, I suppose he hoped that these producers would obtain these albums and use their songs in their shows, some of these songs. Well, if that was his ambition, I don't know, I think he was a bit over-ambitious, because a lot of these are actually quite dated, even by 1950s standards, you know. Let's see, what have we got here? A nice little waltz called The Star, I think. Silver Star. Music by Horatio Nichols. How about that? A song called Babette. Music by Horatio Nichols. Yeah, amazing. Haunting Waltz, yeah. When you played the organ and I sang the rosary. Would you use that in any of these shows? I don't know, maybe do. Let Me Dream in Your Arms Again. Music by Horatio Nichols. What else have we got here? Mistakes. Music by, not Horatio Nichols. Yes, We Have No Bananas. Would you use that? I don't really know. Carolina Moon. Carolina Moon. Now that was copyrighted in 1928. Now in 1928, my dear old mum, bless her heart, lovely lady, my mum, she came on to Blackpool on holidays with her sister, and she wandered into these song booths, and they actually got her to sing Carolina Moon. She was only 7 years of age. They stood her on a chair, and she sang 2 verses, 2 choruses or whatever, and whilst they sold 6 copies of music. And for her efforts, she was rewarded with a payment. 1 shilling. She was so proud, she dashed home to where she was staying with her aunt in Watson Road. She said to her mother, "Hey, guess what? I've just been given a shilling for singing Carolina Moon for Lawrence Wright." And her mother took the shilling off her. Not only that, she said, "Go back tomorrow, see if you can get another shilling." I can well believe that. Me and Jane in a Plane. That's the one he publicised, of course, going down the tower. Don't Go Down the My Dead. That's the one he dedicated to the mining disaster. The Toy Drum Major. We might use that in the pantomime, I don't know. Music by Horatio Nichols. I mean, let's face it, who would these days would think of singing a song called Happy Days Are Here Again? Now, who in this, or who, oh yes, of course you would, yeah. What makes these albums of interest is the fact that there's a frontispiece, and they contain 4 pages of photographs from his family album. There he is with his violin, age 16. There's the front of his stall in Leicester Market. There's the front of his store in Denmark Street in his naval uniform. He had a concert party on Douglas Head in the Isle of Man. And absolutely, there he is with the elephant, inspired to ride Baghdad, with all kinds of people: George Bernard Shaw, Julie Andrews, Billy Butlin, other band leaders, Ambrose, Jack Hilton, and Winifred Atwell, Beverly Sisters, Johnny Ray, Eddie Calvert, Nat Jackley. But what makes these albums particularly interesting to me is the fact there is an inscription on the flyleaf. I'll read this one to you. It says, "To my dear friend, Ken Platt." Now, Ken Platt, of course, was another one of those lovely, warm Lancashire comedians. My dear friend, Ken Platt, thanks for singing my songs. Because Ken Platt always finishes his act with a song, of course. Something like, with the parting of the ways, you took all my happy days and left me lonely nights, which of course was published by his Nips, of course. I'll read you this one. This is quite a good one. I'll just leave that there for a minute. I'll just read you the inscription on this album. It says, "Dear Ken." Oh, Ken Platt, of course, by the way, lived not far away from Lawrence in his bungalow in Carlingate, because Ken Platt lived, is it 4 streets away, 5 streets away, in his bungalow in Pembroke Avenue. Yeah, so we didn't have far to go to collect these. "Dear Ken, thanks very much for featuring the right songs. Herewith another collection of songs, many suitable for wonderful you." What a charmer, isn't it? Eh? Wow. And he goes on, "Well, I had to take my coat off to write this." Of course, Ken Platt's catchphrase, of course, was, "I won't take my coat off, I'm not stopping." It was rather good, that, wasn't it?
Very good.
Daft as a brush. "I had to take my coat off to write this. I've enjoyed you on TV and radio, always first class. You do make me laugh. Best wishes, Lawrence," and it's dated 1959. I assure you now that both of these albums, both of them, will forever and ever be among my souvenirs. Now then, there is a little footnote. Have we got time to tell you this? Not a footnote, what can we call it? A coda, of course, musical term. Back in 1963, I was involved in my first summer season, you see, which was the Jack Story Show, an old-time musical called Thanks for the Memory on St. Anne's Pier. And Jack Story had invited Lawrence to come to the first night. So there I am, 18 years of age, waiting to start the show. The 1st of June it was, and down the centre gangway was wheeled Lawrence Knight, right to the very front. The front of house manager came round with a programme for him to look at, which he held very awkwardly, of course. And David Bamber, he was called, front of house manager, and I thought, this is amazing. Here I am, my first night professionally in the business. Jack Story is on stage, Randolph Sutton is in the show, and in the audience is Horatio Nichols. It can't get much better than this, I thought. And believe it or not, and my name was in the programme, so he's reading my name as well. I thought, wow, amazing this. And that programme was still amongst his effects when they emptied his bungalow. He was cleared in 2007, and that programme was still there amongst all his stuff. So I got it back again. And of course we went round to see him after the show, thanked him for coming, he thanked us for a good show. I think his speech had more or less come back by then. And of course Jack chatted to him for quite a long time. But my last memory is of someone, I don't know what the word is really, I think forlorn, maybe that is the word. This giant, to me, a giant in the music business, the entertainment business, slumped rather helplessly in this wheelchair. It was bordering on the sad in a way. He had a few more outings after that. He went down to London. He spent some time in the spring of 1964 in London. But when he returned, he had a very bad fall. He fell very badly. and he was rushed to the hospital with a suspected heart attack. And he passed away a few days later in May 1964. He was 76, so I suppose, considering what he'd been through, that was fair age to reach, you know. Anyway, the following year, I'm doing the summer season on this very pier, in the old arcade theatre, the one which they'd moved on with the show to in 1938. Again, it was the Jack Story show, and he thought it'd be a good idea to pay tribute to his old friend, well, his mentor, really, by having the whole company perform some of Lawrence Wright's songs, either ones he'd written himself or which he'd published. And Jack's contribution to that item was to sing and get the whole audience joining in with, well, what else? Can I just get a note on the piano, Dennis? Is that all right? I won't keep you long. Starting note. Here it is. What else could I sing but... There's nothing left for me of days that used to be. They're just a memory among my souvenirs. Some letters tied with glue, a photograph or two. I see a rose from you among my souvenirs. A few more tokens rest within my treasure chest, although they do their best to bring me consolation. I count them all apart, and as the teardrops start, I see a broken heart among my souvenirs. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wow. Can't follow that. And so, we close the book on the Lawrence Wright. As I understand it, I would only mention very briefly, but worked with a lot of people who worked with Lawrence Wright, like the lovely Maggie Little, and of Phil Kelly, a fellow called Peter Lawrence, chatted about him, and of course Jack Story mentioned him over and over again. And I still think it's rather puzzling that he's so forgotten and overlooked and disregarded by a lot of people these days. I can't understand that at all. And if they ever decide to put another plaque on this Pavilion Theatre, I know it's called the Joe Longthorne Theatre now, for a very good reason, brilliant entertainer, but to us old timers it'll always be the Pavilion, won't it? If they ever decide, I mean, a statue would be perfect, but even a humble plaque, I do hope that plaque is dedicated to this amazing man who provided so much work for so many people, all his crew, all his staff, all his entertainers, and provided first-class entertainment for thousands upon thousands of people in this very theatre. I do hope that plaque be dedicated to the incredible Lawrence Wright.
Well said.
Thank you very much. And my valuable assistant. Thank you. Second house is waiting to come in. You can live it if it's raining.
Thank you so much, Pete, for that amazing talk on Lawrence Wright. You're right, we don't talk about him enough. Lawrence Wright is an amazing entertainer, entrepreneur. His marketing skills were before his time. He's a phenomenal person to talk about, and it's been great to have Pete here today talking us through it. So I'd just like to give Pete another round of applause.
Oh, wow.
And a round of applause for you guys, because that singing blew me away. That was absolutely phenomenal. So thank you so much for being such good sports and getting involved in that singing. That was amazing. So does anyone have any questions for Pete just before we round up today?
What do you do for an encore?
I always read this bit. What?
He lives in the Cornbury of St Stephen's.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he is. Yeah. He well, he lived in Carling Gate, so he didn't have far to go. That's right. Yeah, his remains are there in St Stephen's. He had a daughter called Laurette, out of Lindup, was very musical herself, was Lorette. I knew he had a daughter, but I thought she was called Babette, because he wrote a very...
I've got the music for that.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, me too. Actually, I played that in that tribute we did to him at the other end of the pier all those years ago, yeah. Yeah, I think his music was divided between different publishers afterwards, wasn't it? I don't know whether it went from one to the other. I know EMI published a lot of his music after he died. And Northern Songs, which of course run by the Beatles, isn't it, Northern Songs? Peter Morris published a lot, yeah, in those days of, you know, music publishers, yeah. Yeah, so that's about it. Thank you very much.
Pete,
Yes.
No?
do you know anything about Terry's juveniles? Because I first met them all, what, 58, I think it was.
Terry's Juveniles.
Yes, so actually they got me some good work.
Oh yeah, yeah. Run by somebody called Terry, I presume.
Yeah. No, it's just that I didn't know she was married to what's his name?
Maggie Little and
Maggie
Tori
Little.
Melody.
Yeah, I didn't know Maggie was one of them.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, in 1939.
If you remember, Maggie used to come with us to bring out the studios, didn't she?
Oh, you know Maggie very well, yeah.
Don't go too fast.
Lived in Bispham, yeah.
Yeah.
Alan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I understand that, I could be wrong, but I was told that the bungalow he lived in Carling Gate, was that he actually named it Souvenir, and it used to be on the gate post. Because someone who told me lived in the area said they remember seeing him being pushed around in his wheelchair in the area. And
yes, you should move across on the north.
And it was called Souvenir.
That's right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, quite right, yeah. Actually, a lot of the stuff was still there. I don't know who the lady was who was living there in 2007, but she was moving out and she didn't know what to do with the stuff. You know, because all the stuff was still there, all the posters and programs and everything. So she contacted Dougie and Beryl. Are you interested in this stuff? If not, it's going to the tip. No, it isn't. So he's around there like a shot, and he got all these posters and programs, didn't he? Remember the big band and stuff?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Loads of it.
And a lot went to dear old Ken Ball.
Same with Ken Platt as well.
And Ken Platt as well. I think that's where he got these from, yeah. Poor old Ken's not very well at the moment. I was going to borrow a few of his posters. You all know Ken, of course.
Ken Ball.
Yeah, but he's not very well at the moment. He's going to loan us a heck of a lot of posters. He's an avid collector of Lawrence Wright. Yeah, any more questions? I have a question. Can I ask a question? Is there any tea left? I'm gagging.
Maybe for you, Pete. Only
Thank
for you.
Thank you.
So just another quick round of applause for Pete. Thank you so much for joining us.